Okay, so the first thing we're going to go over is smoke, and this is going to be a very, very, very simplified version of it. I'm going to show you two different ways to do it, to get started doing it, I should say. One is in the shelf, and another won't be in the shelf. But basically, if you don't use your shelf, which I don't like to use the shelf most of the time, you'll go to the Fluid Effects menu and create a 2D or 3D container. I'm going to create a 2D container, and there it is. If I click play, I got nothing. Well, that's because there's nothing being emitted. It's a container that's made to show off what smoke is when it has smoke in it. But it doesn't have smoke in it or fluids in it. So we need to put those fluids in, and I probably go ahead and point out that the fluid shape that is created with this container is responsible for in large part for what the fluid will look like and how it will react. So this box is kind of the environment that the fluid exists in. Now, whether it's on Earth or on Mars, or if it's in the center of a bowling ball, or at the bottom of the ocean, this box represents that environment. So I want you to notice in the channel box here, if I look at the shape node, there are a lot of attributes. Okay, so that's a bunch. Do you need to know them all? To be really good at this stuff, you probably need to know about a third of them. To get by, you probably need to know about a tenth of them, which is still quite a few attributes. So hence, this is the dumbed down version of fluids. I can point out a few of them that are worth starting with. Okay, now we don't have an emitter in here, so there's nothing like actually inserting a new information into our container. So with this selected, if I go to the Fluid Effects, I can go to Add/Edit Contents. I'm going to add an emitter and emitter. Okay, now when I click play, I've added stuff to it. Now when you're playing back dynamics of any kind, and this is a particle dynamic, then you need to set your animation, go to your animation preferences in the time slider and tell it to play every frame. If you're not playing every frame, then you're not seeing a realistic simulation. Okay? If it starts to like jump around and do some weird stuff, not necessarily bog down the computer, but if your simulation starts to look weird, like your smoke kind of puffs, maybe, and gets a little bit sporadic, it's probably because your CPU is not keeping up with your play speed. Simulation speed is not keeping up with the play speed. Yes?
If we're playing it slower than 24 frames a second, how do we, you just switch back and forth to make sure that it's working okay with your animation?
I will show you. So that's called caching. So you need to create a fluid cache. So we could create, with this object selected, so we'll just select it. We go to fluid in cache, I'm guessing, and you want to create a new cache. Okay, seems like there ought to be another way to do that, but I'm not seeing it. You also have the shelf buttons that can help you do it. Okay, so this is one way to do it. Select those, delete it. Here's another way to do it. It's easier on your shelf button. You have this little 2D effects. It creates the container and the emitter. Now the emitter can be selected individually and you can situate that inside of the container, and then you'll get a different effect. It's going to simulate from the point of the emitter. Okay? Now, if I want to cache this, let's see if this will work. We'll select those, create cache. It's going, as soon as I do that, it starts at frame, whatever my first frame showing is, and it plays back the timeline. And now I can scrub the timeline and I can see that. Normally when you're dealing with dynamics of any sort, you cannot scrub the timeline unless you've cached the simulation. It's kind of like baking it, but it's temporary. Or it can be temporary. Okay, so I recommend running the cache with the cache every time you do it. Because then if you get a really nice effect, you don't have to reproduce it a second time. There's no guarantee that if you run a simulation, this is unlike other things in Maya, because it's dealing with randomness and real-world physics. Even if you alter the real-world situation, environment, it's dealing with real-world mathematics, okay? And when you run it from one time to the next, the chances of it being identical are next to none. So if you do not cache your simulation, then it is not going to be the same from time to time. Although it may look very similar, but when you get it fine-tuned, you want to definitely have it be using a cache.
So we're using a new cache every time we want to play back the animation.
Yes, and it will actually delete your old one and create a new one.
How do we save our old cache?
Well, then you have to tell it to save the cache as a new cache. And then you just go to cache option box and you can tell it the cache name. Okay? And now it's important to have a Maya project set up when you're doing this, because it saves it to your Maya projects cache directory. And it will not find it again if you have not set your project. Okay, so these are all things that can bite you. You can also replace just a portion of your cache if you want to. And if you just go to that option box for the cache, then you'll see a few options that allow you to change that up. Okay. Now, moving on to the few attributes that I even sort of understand. And this is in no way a replacement for somebody who has some real experience in this. So I highly recommend finding somebody who knows what they're doing. But getting started, your resolution is going to be how detailed your simulation is. So the higher this resolution is turned up, the harder it will be on your computer. Also, the more detailed your simulation will be. So it turns out you can't change in a 2D fluid sim, you can't change the resolution D, and you can't change Y or H unless you change your base resolution. So if I change my base resolution to, I'm not going to change it up to anything huge. I'm going to change it down actually to 20. So now if I go back in time, I'm surprised I didn't change that resolution on the W and H. Oh, that might be because it's cached. So let me delete the cache. Yeah. So because it was cached, the resolution wouldn't change. So I'm going to turn off cache for now. I'm not going to recreate the cache because I'm definitely not going to be creating anything worth saving at the moment. But now if I play back,